Move along, sweetheart. You don't belong in this hospital, and you certainly don't belong on my clean marble floor.
Garrett Voss sneered, aggressively tapping the cheap security badge on his belt while stepping directly into her personal space. The woman in the faded gray cardigan didn't flinch. She kept her hands completely flat on the counter.
Sir, my mother is critical upstairs,
She said, her voice deathly quiet.
I am only asking for her room number.
Voss let out a loud, mocking laugh, gesturing to the 3 guards, forming a wall around her.
I know your type. A broke black woman showing up empty-handed in the dark, looking for charity handouts and causing a scene. Look at you. Go back to the streets before I have my boys drag you out in cuffs.
The hospital administrator stood nearby, casually checking her phone, completely laundering the cruelty into standard policy. A passing doctor simply walked away, muttering it wasn't his problem. They all agreed this black woman was a nobody. They had absolutely no idea. In exactly 20 minutes, 3 black federal SUVs will tear into the ambulance lane. Armed U.S. Marshals will flood the lobby, demanding to know who just surrounded the most powerful chief federal prosecutor in the entire district. The woman in the gray cardigan tilted her head, just slightly, and looked at Garrett Voss, the way a person looks at whether they already know is coming. And what happened over the next 90 minutes inside that hospital ended 3 careers, became a federal case, rewrote the policies of an entire hospital system, and got watched by 4 million people who had never once heard of this quiet little town. The man with the swagger and the fake badge had picked the wrong woman. Of every woman in this country, he could have decided didn't belong. He picked the one whose entire job was to prosecute exactly what he was doing to her. Let me take you back. Let me show you how we got to that counter. Because the counter is only where it ended up. It started somewhere much smaller and much older than a marble floor. The town is called Cedar Hollow, county seat. A little north of 50,000 people. The kind of place that prints its own charm on banners and hangs them off the lampposts downtown. Welcome home. Proud of our first responders. There is a Friday farmers market and a Saturday Little League parade and a war memorial in the town square that the high schoolers decorate every May. A nice town. A quiet town. The kind of place people retire to so their grandchildren can grow up somewhere safe? At least. That depends on who you ask. And at the center of Cedar Hollow, sitting on a low rise where you can see it from the highway, is St. Brennan Regional Medical Center. 240 beds. A trauma designation it fought for years to keep. A marble-floored lobby with a grand piano nobody ever plays, and a donor wall of brass names that somebody polishes every single Tuesday. From the outside, St. Brennan looks like exactly what a hospital is supposed to look like. Competence, calm, care. But underneath the marble, St. Brennan had a problem, and it was not a small one. In the 3 years before this story, the hospital's patient relations office had logged, and I want you to sit with this number, 19 formal complaints involving the conduct of its private security force. Patients escorted out before they were even discharged. Visitors detained in stairwells. A diabetic man held in a side room for 40 minutes on suspicion of loitering while his blood sugar dropped. A grandmother told to wait outside in the rain because she looked agitated. Of those 19 complaints, 16 were filed by black or brown families. And here is the detail that should have been a siren and was instead just paperwork. In not one of those 16 cases had anything actually been stolen, or broken, or threatened. Read them. And they are all the same small shape. A man walking too fast toward a sick child. A woman asking a question twice. A teenager sitting in the wrong waiting area. A grandmother who looked agitated. Which is a phrase that, in those binders, almost always meant she was black, and she was upset. As if those two things together were a security event. The complaints were not about anything anyone did. They were about how people looked while doing the most ordinary things a frightened family does in a hospital, and the number of security officers disciplined as a result of any of them you already know. Zero. Not one. Every complaint reviewed internally. Every complaint folded into a binder. Every complaint marked. Resolved. No action warranted. The system reviewed itself. And the system found that the system was fine. Remember that. It matters later. The man at the center of the trouble. And at St. Brennan, he was the center of a lot of trouble. Was Garrett Voss. 53 years old. Director of hospital security for the past 6 years. Broad through the shoulders. The kind of man who had been an athlete once and never quite forgave his body for moving on. He had done 2 years as a sheriff's deputy, out of state a long time ago. And he never let anyone forget it. He forgot to mention that he had not been renewed. He always mentioned the badge. His personnel file was a study in a certain kind of language. Commanding presence. Takes initiative. Does not tolerate disruption. His last performance review had a phrase in it that I want you to hold on to because you are going to hear it again at the end of this story. And it is going to mean something very different by then. The phrase was, proactive about threats. Proactive about threats. Hold on to that. Because here is what that phrase actually meant. Decoded. In the language of how Garrett Voss did his job, he decided who the threats were before they did anything. On sight. By instinct. And his instincts had a color preference he had never once had to examine. Because every time they got it wrong, the binder caught it and called it resolved. A man can go a very long time being wrong about people, when nothing he does is ever written down as a mistake. 6 years. In Voss's case, 6 years of being proactive with families whose only threat was their grief and their skin. And 6 years of a hospital telling him, in the only language institutions ever speak, which is silence, and renewal, and a good word in the file, that he was doing it exactly right. Voss had 2 prior incident reports flagged against him personally. Both involved black visitors. Both were closed after what the hospital called review. One was a man Voss had pinned against an elevator wall for moving too fast toward the pediatric ward. The man was running because his daughter had just come out of surgery. The other was a woman Voss had called aggressive for asking. Twice. Where the billing office was. Neither report went anywhere. The hospital reviewed itself. The hospital was fine. And there was one more thing about Garrett Voss that everyone on the night shift knew, and nobody said out loud. The lobby cameras, the ones that fed directly to his own office, had a habit of being down for maintenance at exactly the moments Voss was working a confrontation. Funny how that worked. The cameras were up all day. They were up for the donor galas. And then the moment things got heated near the front desk, the moment a voice got raised, the system was down for maintenance, except tonight. This one particular Tuesday night, in the slow gray hours, after visiting time should have ended, tonight, every camera in that lobby stayed on. Every frame. Every word the microphones in the new fire safety panels happened to catch. And that, more than anything else, is the reason you are hearing this story, instead of never hearing it at all. Now, the woman. I am not going to give you her name yet, not her title, not her work, because on that Tuesday night, none of it mattered to Garrett Voss. None of it mattered to the administrator who backed him, or the doctor who looked away. All any of them saw was a black woman in a worn gray cardigan and flat shoes. No makeup. A canvas tote bag over one shoulder. Standing at a hospital counter at an hour when, in their minds, the right kind of person had already gone home. Here is what I will tell you. She was 49, tall, taller than Voss, which I think bothered him more than he would ever admit. She had the kind of face that gave nothing away. A stillness that people often mistook for weakness, right up until the floor opened under them. She had driven 2 hours to get to Cedar Hollow that afternoon, straight from her office. And she had not gone home to change, because there had not been time. She had gotten a phone call at 10 minutes to 5. The call that every adult child dreads. Your mother has been brought in. You should come. So she came. She came in the clothes she had been wearing, with her work bag still on her shoulder, with a phone full of messages she had not answered, and with one small object tucked into her wallet that she carried everywhere. The way some people carry a photo, or a saint's medal, or their father's watch, she carried a hospital wristband, a soft, faded paper band, the printing long since worn down to a gray smudge, 22 years old, from another hospital, in another state, on the worst night of her life, and, strangely, one of the most important nights of it too. I will tell you about that wristband. I will tell you exactly why a grown woman, a powerful woman, keeps a scrap of paper in her wallet for 22 years. But not yet. Right now, it is 20 minutes to 7 in the evening. The day shift has bled into the night shift. The lobby of St. Brennan is nearly empty. A janitor running a buffer in slow arcs across the marble. A vending machine humming. The unplayed piano gathering its quiet. And a woman in a gray cardigan walking through the sliding doors with a tote bag on her shoulder and a single question in her chest. Where is my mother? And across the lobby, leaning against the front desk with a coffee he did not pay for, Garrett Voss looks up, and he decides, before she has said a single word, before she has done a single thing, that she is a problem he is going to solve. So what set him off? What was it about a tired woman walking into a hospital at dinner time that flipped the switch in Garrett Voss? That question is the whole story. So let me take you to the counter, and let me show you how it actually began. Because you have already heard how it ended. She went to the front desk first. The right way. The way you are supposed to. There was a young woman behind the counter. A patient access clerk named Brittany, barely out of her 20s, a headset around her neck, her eyes already tired. Good evening, the woman in the cardigan said. Calm. Warm. Avon. My name is... I got a call about my mother. She was brought into the emergency department this afternoon. I would like to find out where she is. And whether I can see her, simple, reasonable. The single most ordinary request a hospital lobby hears 500 times a day. Brittany started typing. Sure, she said. What is the patient's last name? And that is when Garrett Voss pushed off the desk. He had been listening. Of course he had been listening. He covered the 10 feet between them, slow and easy. The way a man walks when he wants you to watch him take his time. He stepped in beside the clerk, a little in front of her, putting his body between the woman and the desk. We are past visiting hours, he said. Flat. No greeting. The woman looked at him. I understand it is late, she said. I drove 2 hours. I got a call from this hospital telling me to come. I am only asking where she is. Visiting ended at 6. Voss tapped a laminated sign, zip-tied to the counter. He did not even read it. He just tapped it. Like the tapping was the argument. I am not a visitor, she said. Still leavin'. Still quiet. I am her daughter. She was admitted today. There are exceptions for... There are no exceptions. He cut her off. You can come back tomorrow. 9 in the morning. Behind him. Brittany, the clerk, had stopped typing. Her eyes flicked up. To the woman. Then to Voss. Then back down to her screen. Where? I promise you. The patient's name and room number were sitting right there in front of her. She had already found it. It was right there. And she said nothing. Because Garrett Voss had a way of making people on his own shift very quiet. The woman in the cardigan took a slow breath. You could see her choosing her words the way you choose your footing on ice. Sir, she said, I would like to speak with the charge nurse in the emergency department. Or a patient advocate. My mother is elderly. She has a heart condition. If something has changed in her status, I have a right to know. And the hospital has an obligation to tell me. I am being very calm with you. I would appreciate the same. And here is the thing. Every word of that was true. Every word of that was. In fact, the law, federal law, the exact kind of law she happened to know better than almost any human being alive. But she did not say that. She did not pull that card. She gave Garrett Voss every chance in the world to simply be a decent man for 10 seconds. He did not take it. This is where the words you heard at the very beginning come back. Voss leaned in, dropped his voice into something almost gentle, which is always how the worst things get said. And he told her exactly what he thought of her. Move along. Sweetheart, you don't belong in this hospital. I know your type. A broke black woman showing up empty-handed in the dark. Go back to the streets before I have my boys drag you out in cuffs. There it was. The whole thing, the entire rotten heart of it, in a handful of words. Not, you don't belong here after hours. Not, you don't belong past the desk. You don't belong in this hospital. As if the building itself, the marble and the brass and the unplayed piano, had been built for someone. And she was not that someone, and they both knew exactly what he meant. The woman did not flinch. I keep saying that because I need you to picture it. A man 2 feet from her face had just told her, in a public lobby, that she was the wrong kind of person to stand on that floor, and her hands stayed flat and open on the counter, and her breathing stayed level, and her eyes stayed on his Blakenage. What is your name? Sir, she asked. And your title? Garrett Voss. Director of Security, he said it like a man laying down a winning hand. And you are about to be escorted out, so you can walk, or you can be walked. Your choice. I would like that escort to bring a patient advocate, she said, and I would like the front desk to note the time, and that I came here at the hospital's request, and that I was refused information about my mother's condition by the Director of Security. Can you note that? Please. She turned slightly toward Brittany. Will you note the time for me? And Brittany, 24 years old, 8 months into a job she needed, looked at Garrett Voss and looked at the clock and wrote nothing down. Here is the part I need to slow down for, because this is where it stopped being an argument and became the thing it became. Voss keyed the radio on his shoulder. Mike, Tonya, lobby? Now, 2 more security officers came through a side door. Within the minute, a heavy-set younger man. Mike, the kind who had never had an original thought about a confrontation in his life and did not intend to start. And a woman, Tonya, older, harder to read, who took one look at the scene, and you could see something flicker behind her face. Something that knew, but she stood where Voss told her to stand. 3 of them now. 3 uniformed bodies in a half circle around one woman in a gray cardigan with a tote bag on her shoulder. And I want you to picture that geometry for a second, because it tells you everything. Not one man making a mistake, 3 men. Arranged. A formation. The kind of thing that does not happen by accident. The kind of thing that only happens when a building has taught its people, over years, that this is what you do. This is who you do it to. And nothing bad will come of it. 3 guards around one tired woman. And the only thing any of them could have told you she had done wrong was stand still and ask where her mother was. Mom? Let's go, Mike said, reaching for her elbow. Don't touch me. She said it quietly. But the room heard it. I am not resisting anything. I am standing still and asking questions. If you put your hands on me, you will be committing battery. And there are cameras in this lobby. And I want you to think about whether you would like that on a screen later. I am going to reach into my bag, slowly, and take out my phone. And I am going to call someone. Is that all right with you? I am telling you what I am doing before I do it. Nod if you understand. Even Mike nodded. There was something in the way she narrated her own movements. I am going to reach, slowly, into my bag. That landed on everyone there. Even if most of them did not understand why. It was the cadence of a person who has been taught, who has had to learn, that the smallest motion of a black hand toward a black bag can be turned into a justification. She moved like someone diffusing something. She reached into her tote, slowly, and here is where it happened. Because as she shifted the bag, her wallet came loose and tipped onto the counter, and it fell open, and 3 things spilled out across the marble in front of Garrett Voss. A driver's license, a second card, small, official, with a seal on it, the kind of card that changes a room when the right person reads it, and a soft, faded paper, hospital wristband, gray, with age, curled at the edges, 22 years old. 3 objects on the counter, inches from Voss's hand, and Garrett Voss looked down at them. At the license, at the card with the seal, at the old wristband, and he did the single most important thing he would do all night. He swept them off the counter with the back of his hand. "I don't care what is in your wallet," he said. "Pick your stuff up off my floor and get out." He did not read the card. He did not even look at the card. Not really. It was right there. The thing that would have stopped all of it was right there, with its seal facing up, and a man who had spent 30 seconds bragging about how long he had been doing this swept it onto the marble like it was trash. Because the idea that this woman could be anyone who mattered was, to him, literally not worth the 2 seconds it would take to read. That is not an accident. That is the whole point. The credential is never the thing that protects you in the moment. The willingness to see you is the thing. And Garrett Voss was not willing. The woman knelt, calm, unhurried, and she gathered her things up off the marble. The license, the card, and last, with a care that was different from how she picked up the rest, the old paper wristband, which she smoothed once between 2 fingers before she tucked it back into her wallet. Then she stood, and she made her phone call. "Let me tell you about that wristband. I promised I would. And now is the time. Because you need to understand what she was holding when she stood up off that floor. 22 years ago, the woman in the gray cardigan was 27 years old. And she had no title, and no seal on any card, and no power in any room at all. She was a young law student, broke, exhausted, the first person in her family to go past high school. And one winter night, her mother, the same mother lying upstairs in St. Brennan right now, collapsed in their apartment. Chest pain, gray lips. The young woman called an ambulance and rode with her to the nearest emergency room, a county hospital in a hard part of a hard city. And there, she ran into a wall, not a medical wall, a human one, a triage desk that decided, somehow, that her mother's pain was not urgent. A nurse who told her to have a seat and then forgot she existed. An hour passed. Then, too, her mother slumped lower in the plastic chair, and the young woman, who would one day become the most composed person in any room she entered, stood at that desk and begged, and got nothing, because she was young and black and poor and frightened, and nobody at that desk could be bothered to see her. And then a nurse came on shift, a black woman, older, tired, at the end of a double, who walked past that waiting room and looked at the gray-lipped woman in the chair and the terrified daughter beside her. And that nurse did not say, "Have a seat." That nurse took one look, put her hand on the mother's wrist, felt what she felt, and started moving. She did not ask permission. She did not check the queue. She got that woman into a bay, got a doctor on her, and stayed past the end of her own shift to make sure it was done right. The mother had been minute, from a heart that would have stopped in a plastic chair in a waiting room, because the system could not be bothered to see her, and one person chose to see her. One person decided that a stranger's mother was worth fighting for, when there was nothing in it for her at all. Before they moved the mother upstairs that night, they had put a paper band on her wrist. And in the chaos of the days that followed, when her mother came home alive, the young woman found that band in a pocket, and she could not throw it away. It was proof that the worst night of her life had a person in it who had done the right thing for no reason except that it was right. She kept it. She kept it through law school and the bar exam and 20 years of cases. She kept it in her wallet through every promotion, because every time she walked into a room where she had power over people who had none, she wanted to remember the desk where she had had none. And the one person who had looked anyway, that is what was in her wallet. That is what Garrett Voss swept onto the marble floor and called your stuff. So you understand now, maybe, why she was so calm. She had been here before. She knew exactly where it went. The only difference in the whole world was that this time, she was not 27 and powerless. This time, she was the one they should have looked at. The call connected. She held the phone to her ear, her eyes never leaving Voss, and she spoke 6 words into it. "It's me. I need you here." That was all. She listened for a moment, said an address. St. Brennan Regional, Cedar Hollow, main lobby. And she hung up. She did not raise her voice. She did not threaten anyone with the call. She simply made it and put the phone back in her bag and waited. "Vosh smirked." "Who did you call?" he said. "Your lawyer." He looked at Mike and Tanya like it was a joke they were all in on. These people always call their lawyer. "No," she said. "Not my lawyer." "Then who?" She did not answer. She just looked at him with that terrible patience. And for the first time, a flicker of something crossed Garrett Voss's face. Not fear. Not yet. Just the faintest itch of a man who has always been able to read a room and has suddenly read one wrong. He buried it under more bluster. That is what men like Voss do when the ground shifts. They stamp on it harder. "You know what? I am done," he said. He turned to his officers. "Trespass her. I want her off the property. If she will not go, we hold her for the sheriff, and we charge her." I have had enough of the attitude. The attitude? She had not raised her voice once. She had narrated her own hands. She had asked for his name and a patient advocate, and in the language of Garrett Voss, that was attitude. Because to a certain kind of man, a black woman who will not be afraid of him is the most provoking thing in the world. It was about then that the administrator arrived, Pamela Reddick, patient relation, in her 50s, a sharp blazer, even at this hour, a lanyard of keycards, the brisk walk of someone who manages problems for a living and has decided in advance which kind of problem this is. She had been paged by the front desk, not because anyone wanted to help the woman, but because Voss wanted backup of a different kind. Voss handled bodies. Reddick handled narratives. "What is going on here?" Reddick said. "Not really a question. Visitor refusing to leave after hours." Voss said. Got aggressive at the desk. "I have asked her 3 times. That is not what happened." The woman said. And notice this. Now she corrected the record. Precisely. The very first lie told in front of a new witness. "I came at the hospital's request regarding my mother, who was admitted today. I asked for her room or for a patient advocate. I was refused. Told I did not belong in this hospital. And I have been surrounded by 3 officers. I have not raised my voice, and I have not moved from this spot. I would like a patient advocate. and I would like the name of the administrator on call. That is me, Reddick said. And here was her chance. The second chance. The administrator's chance. The chance for the system to correct the man. She had the authority to pull up the chart, to walk this woman to her mother, to end the whole thing in 90 seconds. Instead, Pamela Reddick looked her up and down. The cardigan, the flat shoes, the tote bag, the tired face, and she made the same calculation Voss had made, only with better grammar. Ma'am, I understand you are upset, she said, but our staff have to enforce our policies, and our policies exist for everyone's safety. Visiting hours are over. If you have concerns about your mother's care, there is a process. You can call patient relations during business hours and file a blank. My mother may be dying upstairs, the woman said. Still ill. But for the first time, something underneath the calm, a single thread of steel, pulled tight. I am not filing a form during business hours. I am asking you, the administrator on call, to tell me whether my mother is alive, and to let me see her. That is not a policy question. That is a human one. And I am giving you the chance to be a human being about it. À silence. The buffer machine had stopped. The janitor was standing very still by the wall, pretending to coil a cord. And Pamela Reddick, who had every tool to fix this in her hands, chose the binder. Security will see you out, she said. You are welcome to come back tomorrow. There was one more. Dr. Lionel Cruz, an attending, came through the lobby on his way somewhere else. White coat, stethoscope, the unhurried stride of a man at the top of a small mountain. He clocked the scene the way doctors clock a commotion, as someone else's job. Voss caught him. Doc, you got a second. Voss said, this visitor is claiming a medical thing. Says her mother is critical. Emergency department admit. Can you confirm she is even? You know, that there is even a patient. It was a small thing, Voss asked. A look at a screen, a name, and Cruz could have done it. He could have walked to the desk and pulled the chart and said, yes, her mother is here. Take her up. But Cruz looked at the woman and looked at the three officers and did the arithmetic of a man who does not want a problem on his evening. And he said the words that would, in about 40 minutes, look so much worse than he could possibly imagine. I cannot get involved in security matters, he said. If they have made a determination, that is their call. And he kept walking. He kept walking. So now you have all four of them. The security director who started it, the administrator who laundered it into policy, the doctor who washed his hands of it, and behind the desk, the young clerk who had found the room number in 10 seconds and said nothing. Pour chance, 4 people with the power to end it in under 2 minutes, with a single act of ordinary decency, and every one of them, in their own way, said the same thing. Not my problem. Not my kind of problem. Move along. This is the part I want us to feel. The cruelty is never just one man. One man can be a bad apple. But it takes a whole orchard to let a bad apple tell a woman her dying mother is a policy matter, and have 4 other people nod. The horror is not Voss. The horror is how easy it was for everyone else to let Voss be Voss. Everyone except one. Her name was Nika Adeyemi Park. Everyone called her Nia. She was a charge nurse, 31 years old, 4 years on the floor. And she had come down to the lobby because the emergency department was looking for a missing family member of a patient in Bay 9. An elderly woman, cardiac, stable now, but scared, who kept asking, in a thin voice, "Where is my daughter? Did my daughter come?" Nia came around the corner with a name written on a sticky note in her hand, and she stopped because she saw it. She saw 3 security officers and an administrator standing in a wall around a black woman in a gray cardigan. And she saw the woman's face, not afraid, but holding something the way you hold a door shut against a flood. And Nia, who had a grandmother of her own, who had stood in a few walls like that herself, felt her stomach drop. She looked at the sticky note. She looked at the woman, and some instinct, some terrible certainty, told her these 2 things were the same thing. "Excuse me," Nia said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "Are you?" "I am looking for the family of a patient in the emergency department." "Is your mother?" She glanced at the note. "Is your mother's name?" She said the name, and the woman in the gray cardigan closed her eyes for 1 second. 1 single second. The only crack she had shown all night. And she said, "Yes, that is my mother." "Is she alive?" "She is stable," Nia said quickly. "She is awake. She is asking for you. She has been asking for an hour," and the lobby went very, very quiet because everyone there had just heard it. There was a patient. There was a mother. She had been admitted. She was upstairs, awake, asking for the daughter who had been standing in that lobby for 10 minutes being told she did not belong. Every lie had just collapsed at once, out loud, in front of all of them. Pamela Reddick rounded on her. "Nurse, this is being handled by security," she said. "You can go back upstairs." And Nia, 31 years old, 4 years in, terrified of exactly the woman who was now staring at her, looked at Reddick, and looked at Voss, and looked at the daughter who had been told her dying mother was a form to fill out during business hours. And her voice shook, and she said it anyway. "No. With respect, this is her mother. The patient has been asking for her by name. I am not going back upstairs and telling that woman her daughter was here." And got turned away. "I will not do it." She turned to the daughter, and her hand came up, half a gesture, half an apology. "Come with me. I will take you to her right now." Voss stepped in front of her. "She has been trespassed," he said. "She does not go anywhere but out." "Then trespass me too," Nia said, and her voice cracked clean in half. "Because I am walking her upstairs." It was the bravest thing anyone did that night, and it was done by the person with the least power in the room, with the most to lose. And I want you to notice what her courage cost in that instant. Nia was not a hero in a movie. She was a 31-year-old woman with rent and a license to protect, and a supervisor, Reddick, staring at her with a look that said, "I will remember this." Every nurse on that floor knew what it meant to cross patient relations, and she crossed it anyway. Voice shaking, knees probably shaking. For a stranger, she had known for 90 seconds. Because somewhere in her, there was a line she could not make herself step over. And the line was, "I will not go tell a dying woman her daughter was here." and I let them turn her away. That is all courage ever actually is. Not the absence of fear. A line you find you cannot cross. Discovered out loud. At the worst possible moment. In front of exactly the people who can hurt you for it. It should have ended there. A nurse had said the truth out loud. A patient was upstairs asking for her daughter. Any sane system rights itself at that point. But Garrett Voss had stopped being able to back down about 3 minutes earlier. Somewhere around the moment, a black woman refused to be afraid of him in front of his own officers. For Voss, this was no longer about a visitor, or a policy, or even the hospital. It was about a thing far older and far smaller than any of that. It was about a man who had decided who was allowed to win in his lobby, and it was not going to be her. Nobody is going upstairs, he said, and he put his hand on the radio again. And this time, he called the sheriff's office. Dispatch. This is St. Brennan Security. I have got a trespasser refusing to leave. Possible disturbance. Requesting a unit. He looked at the daughter the whole time he said it. Possible disturbance. Daring her. Building the file in real time. The way he had built a dozen files before. The way the camera being down had always let him, except the camera was not down. And there was one more thing Garrett Voss did not know about. Across the lobby, sitting in one of the waiting area chairs, that whole time, a man in his 40s named Desmond, there for his own reasons, waiting on news of his brother, had taken out his phone about 4 minutes earlier and started recording, quietly, held low against his knee. Angle it up. He had seen exactly what this was. The second Voss said, "You don't belong in this hospital," because Desmond had seen it before too. And he had thought, the way more and more people think now, not this time. This time, somebody is going to have it on film. So it was all being captured, twice, by the hospital's own cameras, finally left on, and by a stranger in a chair who decided a black woman's dignity was worth the storage on his phone. The daughter knew. Of course she knew. She had clocked Desmond's angle 10 minutes ago. People who have learned to narrate their own hands also learn to find the cameras. And it gave her what it gives anyone. Not safety. Exactly. But a witness. The thing she had never had at 27. "You called the sheriff," she said to Voss. And her voice was almost kind now, which was somehow the most frightening it had been all night. "Good. I would like the sheriff to come. I would like an independent law enforcement officer to arrive and document everything that has happened here. Please make sure they hurry." That gave Voss pause again. Why does she want the police to come? But he was too far in to hear the warning in it. Here is the choice the story made. And I want to name it for you out loud, because it is the spine of everything. She had, in her wallet, the card with the seal. She had, in her phone, the call she had already made. At any second, across that whole 10 minutes, she could have ended it. She could have drawn herself up and announced exactly who she was, and watched the blood drain out of Garrett Voss's face, and walked upstairs over the wreckage. She had every right to. Most of us would have in the first 30 seconds. She did not, and it was not weakness. And it was not even only strategy. It was something colder and more deliberate than either, because she understood something about men like Voss and administrators like Reddick and doctors like Cruz that they did not understand about themselves. She understood that if she told them who she was, they would not be ashamed of how they had treated her. They would only be afraid of what she could do to them. Their cruelty would reframe itself instantly as a misunderstanding, an unfortunate mix-up. If only we had known. And the lesson, the only lesson that mattered, would evaporate if only we had known, as if it would have been fine to treat a nobody this way, as if the wrong was being rude to a powerful person and not being cruel to a frightened daughter. So she made them choose. She gave them 10 full minutes, 10 chances each, to be decent to a woman they believed was no one, a woman in a worn cardigan with a dying mother, and no power in the room. She let them show her, freely and on camera, exactly who they were when they thought there would be no consequences. She let them write the record themselves, and only when the record was complete, only when every one of them had had every chance and chosen contempt, did she let the reveal come. She did not even deliver it herself. She had made a phone call. She let it walk through the door. The minutes between that phone call and the doors opening were the longest minutes in that lobby. And they did something to the people in it. Because a strange thing happens when you have committed to cruelty and then have to wait. The certainty starts to leak. Tonya, the older guard, drifted half a step back from Voss's shoulder, her eyes moving between the calm woman and the exits. A woman doing math. She did not like the answer to. Mike kept clearing his throat. Even Pamela Reddick, who had arrived so brisk and so sure, had stopped talking and started checking her phone, then putting it away, then checking it again. The body language of someone who has begun to suspect she is standing on the wrong side of something she cannot yet see. Only Voss held his ground, because Voss could not do anything else. He had built his whole self on never backing down, and the machinery of that self had no reverse gear. He filled the silence with more of himself. You think somebody is coming to save you? He said. Nobody is coming. You know how many people think somebody is coming? They never are. He was talking to her, but he was reassuring himself. And you could hear it. Someone is coming. She said simply, not a threat, a weather report. And while we wait, nurse. She did not look away from Voss, but she spoke to Nia, gently. Go back upstairs and tell my mother her daughter is here, and is coming as fast as she is allowed. Tell her I love her. Don't let her think I did not come. Nia hesitated, caught between the order and her own fear of leaving this woman in the wall of guards. Go on. The woman said, I will be all right. They have already done the worst thing they are going to do tonight. They just do not know it yet. Nia vent. And that line, they have already done the worst thing. They just do not know it yet, hung in the marble air. And even Mike seemed to feel it land, because he took his hand off his belt and put it in his pocket, like a man trying to look less like part of something. And then the doors opened. The first thing through was not a sheriff's cruiser. It was a black SUV, then a second, then a third, pulling fast into the ambulance bay and the fire lane where nothing is ever allowed to park. And out of them came people in dark jackets, with 3 letters across the back that everyone in that lobby could read from across the marble. Federal letters. The kind of letters that do not come for a trespassing call, And at the front of them, badge already out and held up high, came a man in a suit who walked straight past Voss, like Voss was a coat rack, straight to the woman in the gray cardigan. And he stopped, and his whole posture changed. Squared, formal, deferential. And he said, loud enough for the marble to carry it to every corner of that frozen room, "Ma'am, are you all right?" We came as fast as we could. And then, turning, scanning the 3 security officers, and the administrator, and the doctor who had stopped at the edge of the lobby to see what the trucks were about, he said the sentence that detonated Garrett Voss's life. "Is there a problem here? Because I need everyone in this lobby to understand exactly who you have spent the last half hour surrounding." He gestured to the woman, and his voice was iron. "This is Adawaram Becky Hart, United States Attorney, the Chief Federal Prosecutor for this entire district, and I am Deputy United States Marshal Hollis. And that call she made 20 minutes ago was to me." You have to understand what those words did to that room. A United States Attorney is not a security guard with a real badge. A United States Attorney is the single most powerful federal law enforcement official in an entire region. The person whose office decides whether to bring federal charges, including, of all things, civil rights charges against officials who deprive people of their rights under color of authority. She was, quite literally, the exact category of person whose job it is to prosecute what had just happened to her. They had spent 30 minutes humiliating the one person in the country most equipped to make it a federal case. Garrett Voss's face did the thing faces do when the floor goes. The color left it in stages. First the swagger, then the certainty, then something underneath that you could only call animal. He opened his mouth. Ma'am? I did not. There was no way for me to know, and there it was. There was no way for me to know. The exact sentence she had predicted. The instant pivot. Not. I am sorry I was cruel. But I did not know you were important. It proved her right in real time. It proved that nothing about his conduct had been about safety, or policy, or even the lateness of the hour. It had only ever been about who he thought he could get away with it on. Adaora Mbeki Hart looked at him for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet and steady, and it did more damage than any shouting could have. "You are right," she said. "You had no way to know I was a United States attorney. That is exactly the point. Mr. Voss, you did not know who I was. You only knew what I looked like. And what I looked like was enough for you to surround me? To lie about me. To call me aggressive for standing still. And to tell me I did not belong in a hospital while my mother was dying upstairs. She let it sit. You keep saying you did not know. But the woman you were treating that way, the one with no title, the one you thought was nobody, she was a real person too. She had a mother too. She deserved better too. Everything you did was fine with you. Right up until you found out it might cost you something. That is the thing I want you to think about. Not that you picked the wrong woman. That you would have done it to the right one. Nobody in the lobby said a word. Pamela Reddick had gone gray. Dr. Cruz had taken a step backward. As if proximity were the crime, Brittany at the desk was crying silently into her headset. And Mike and Tanya had stepped away from Voss, without seeming to decide to. The way people instinctively clear a space around something that is about to fall. And then Adaora Mbeki Hart, did the thing that told you everything about who she actually was. She turned away from all of them. From the marshals. From the cowering director. From the collapsing administrator. She turned to the one person who had earned it. The young charge nurse standing there shaking, who had said, "Trespass me too." And she said, gently, "You said you would take me to my mother." Nia nodded, tears on her face. Unable to speak, "Then let's go," the woman said. "Everything else can wait." She looked back at Deputy Hollis. "Hold the scene. Nobody leaves. Nobody touches those cameras. I want the footage preserved before anyone in this building has a clever idea about maintenance. I will be upstairs with my mother. When I come down, we will begin." And she walked away from her own vindication. She left the powerful men standing in the rubble of it. Because the only thing she had ever actually wanted from that lobby was to see her mother. And she had not forgotten it for 1 second through the entire ordeal. That was the whole point. The title was never what she came for. The title was just what they should have seen. Nia walked her to the elevator, and neither of them spoke until the doors closed. Then the young nurse let out a breath that had been trapped in her for 10 minutes, and said, barely above a whisper, "I thought I was going to get fired. I still might." And Ada Ora looked at her. At this frightened young woman who had risked the only job she had for a stranger. And she said, "No, you are not. I will see to that personally." "What is your name?" Nia told her. Ada Ora repeated it once. Quietly. The way you do when you are filing something away that you intend to honor. Nika. Thank you. You were the only person down there who saw me. Remember that you did that. Whatever else happens. You did that. The elevator opened onto the cardiac floor. All soft beeps and low light. And Nia led her down the hall to the room. And stopped at the door. And stepped back. Because some thresholds, you let a person cross alone. Ada Ora went in. She sat by her mother's bed. The old woman, the same woman a nurse had saved in a plastic chair 22 years ago, opened her eyes and saw her daughter, and said, in a thin voice, "You came." And the most powerful federal prosecutor in the district, the woman who had not flinched once in front of 3 guards and an administrator and a doctor, put her head down on the hospital blanket beside her mother's hand. And finally, where no camera could see, let herself shake. "I am sorry it took me so long to get up here," Ada Ora said. When she could speak, "There was some trouble downstairs. It does not matter now." Her mother's hand found her hair, the way it had when Ada Ora was small. "You are here," she said. A pause. Her eyes drifting. Lucid and not. The way they get. There was a nurse. Ons, you remember. When I was sick before, a nurse who would not let them ignore me. I remember. Mama. Ada Ora said, "I have never stopped remembering. You were so scared that night. I was, and look at you now." Her mother's eyes came back into focus for a moment. And there was something in them that saw more than the room. "Look at what you became." Ada Ora did not tell her. She did not tell her mother that the same thing had just happened. 2 floors down, 22 years later, that her own daughter, grown and powerful and gray at the temples, had stood at another desk and been told to have a seat, been told she did not belong. while her mother lay dying above her. She did not say it, because it would have broken the old woman's heart, and because, in the end, it had not mattered. She had gotten upstairs. This time, she had gotten upstairs. She reached into her wallet and took out the wristband, the soft, gray, 22-year-old band, and she held it where her mother could see it. "I still have this," she said. "From that night, I keep it with me, everywhere." Her mother looked at it for a long moment, and something passed over her face, and she closed her hand around her daughter's hand, and the scrap of paper, both. And that was all either of them needed to say. Now let us talk about what came after, because a story that ends with one bad man fired is a story that lets the orchard off the hook. The point was never Garrett Voss. The point was the system that built him, protected him, and would have built the next one. Adora Mbeki Hart did not personally prosecute the case. She could not. She was the victim, and she knew better than anyone alive how that worked. She recused herself completely, and she made one phone call to the Civil Rights Division. And then she did something that mattered more than any single firing. She let the machine she had spent her life serving do its work correctly. For once, on a case where it usually did not. Here is what the daylight found. When investigators pulled St. Brennan's records, the real ones, with a federal subpoena behind them, the 19 complaints came out of the binder. 16 from black and brown families. 0 disciplines. And the pattern in them was not random. It was Garrett Voss. Again and again, to his name threaded through the worst of them. Always cleared by the same internal review. A review run. It turned out by people who reported to the same administrator who had told a dying woman's daughter to file a form during business hours. And the cameras. Investigators pulled the maintenance logs for the lobby surveillance system, going back 3 years, and cross-referenced them against the incident reports. And there it was, in the data, undeniable. The cameras went down for maintenance at a rate during Voss's confrontations that no honest equipment failure could explain. It had been deliberate. For years, a man had been turning off the eyes of the building before he did the things he did. And the building had let him. The reason this particular night was different, the reason any of it saw daylight, was almost unbearably thin. A new fire safety panel, installed 4 months earlier, had its own independent recording. On a separate system Voss did not control and did not know to disable, and a stranger named Desmond had decided to hold up his phone, pull either of those threads. And this is a story that never happened. A daughter turned away. A record marked. Resolved. No action warranted. A woman who would have driven home in the dark and told no one, because who would believe her? Even her. Even a United States attorney. That is how thin it was. Sit with that. The most powerful federal prosecutor in the district was one fire safety panel and one bystander's phone away from having no proof at all. Now think about everyone who has neither, and none of it would have moved as fast as it did without Desmond, the stranger in the chair. The morning after, before any official statement, before the hospital's lawyers had finished deciding what to call it, his video was already out in the world. 40 seconds of a black woman in a gray cardigan standing perfectly still while 3 uniformed men and an administrator told her she did not belong. did not matter. Should file a form during business hours. And then the cut everyone shared. The doors opening, the federal jackets flooding in, the deputy's voice. Do you understand who you have spent the last half hour surrounding? It did what these things do now. 100,000 views by noon. 1 million by the second day. 4 million before the week was out. And climbing. And the comments were not what the comments usually are. Usually, in the moment, before the reveal, a crowd will side with the badge. But Desmond had been smart. Or lucky. He had kept filming through the whole thing, including the part where the nurse said the patient was real and asking for her daughter. The part where every lie collapsed before anyone knew the woman was anyone, so the public did not get to hide behind. Well, we did not know who she was. Either they watched 4 people be cruel to a woman they were certain was no one, and then watched the certainty turn out to be the crime. People sat with that. The hospital's phones did not stop ringing. The donor wall in the lobby developed some conspicuous silences, and a board that had reviewed itself for years and found itself fine suddenly discovered it had been watching the wrong screen the whole time. The individual consequences came fast, because the footage left no room for the things St. Brennan had always done before, which was nothing. Garrett Voss was terminated within 72 hours. Not allowed to resign. Not allowed to transfer. Escorted out. Badge surrendered. The fake cop swagger finally cashed out for exactly what it had always been worth. The meeting in which they did it lasted under 10 minutes. He did not shout. He did not slam a fist on the table. He just sat there. Very still. The way Adaur, except without the dignity, without the composure, without any of the thing that had made her stillness powerful. He unclipped the badge he had worn like a gun, and set it on the table, and walked out through the lobby he had ruled, past the unplayed piano, past the front desk, where Brittany would not look up at him, and out through the sliding doors he had ordered a woman dragged through. There were news vans in the lot by then. He did not stop, did not speak. He got into his personal truck, and he sat behind the wheel for a long time without starting the engine. 11 minutes. 12. A man staring through a windshield at the building that had let him be exactly who he was for 6 years, and had now, finally, with the whole country watching, decided it could not. Then he drove away. He had told a woman he was the law in that building. The law had a different opinion, but termination was the least of it. The United States Attorney's Office for an adjoining district, handling the recused case, brought federal charges against him for deprivation of rights under color of law. The same statute, almost word for word, that exists. To answer exactly this, the case did not go to trial. He took a plea. The man who had spent 30 minutes telling a woman what the law was learned, in the most personal way available, that he had never understood it at all. Pamela Reddick, the administrator who had laundered cruelty into policy, was removed from her position. Her defense? That she was just enforcing procedure, collapsed the moment investigators showed that the procedure she had cited had documented exceptions for exactly the situation in front of her. Exceptions she had been trained on. Exceptions she chose not to apply to a woman in a worn cardigan. She was not the one with her hand on the radio, but she was the one whose entire job was to be the human exception to the machine. And she had chosen to be the machine. That choice ended her career at St. Brennan. Dr. Lionel Cruz kept his job, but not his comfort. I cannot get involved in security matters read very differently on a screen watched by millions than it had felt in the moment. He was formally reprimanded, required to complete remediation, and this is the part that I think actually reached him. He had to sit across from a review panel and explain why. When a colleague asked him to spend 10 seconds confirming a dying woman was real, he had decided his evening was worth more. He did not have a good answer. There is not one. Brittany, the young clerk who found the room number and said nothing. She was not disciplined. She had been 8 months in, terrified of Voss. And she came forward fully in the investigation and told the truth about everything, including her own silence. The report named her cooperation, but she is the one I think about because she was not cruel. She was just afraid, and the lesson of her is the quietest and maybe the most important. It does not take a Garrett Voss to let a Garrett Voss win. It only takes enough good, frightened people deciding it is safer to look at a screen than at a person. But here is where the story refuses to stop at punishment. And here is where it becomes more than a revenge story. The Federal Review did not end with 3 careers. It opened a formal pattern or practice examination of St. Brennan's entire security and patient relations operation. The kind of review that does not ask, who do we fire? But what did we build that made this normal? And what came out of it had teeth. St. Brennan entered into a consent agreement, not a press release, a binding document with a federal monitor attached to it. And the agreement required real things. Every security officer retrained every year on the actual limits of their authority. That a hospital security badge is not a police badge. That they cannot detain a visitor on a hunch. That you don't belong here is not a policy. It is a liability. Surveillance footage placed beyond the reach of the security director on an independent system with tamper logging, so that no man could ever again turn off the eyes of the building before he did something he did not want seen. A revised visitor policy, with its exceptions written in plain language at the top, not buried. Exceptions for the family of critically ill patients. The exact exception that should have ended this in 90 seconds. An independent patient and visitor ombudsman office, reporting outside the chain of command that had buried 19 complaints, with the authority to investigate and to recommend discipline that the hospital could not simply fold into a binder, and an early warning system that flagged any officer with multiple complaints for mandatory outside review, so that the next Garrett Voss got caught at complaint 3 instead of complaint 19. Structural change. Prevention. Not just punishment. The thing the binder had never allowed. And there was one more part, the one I care about most. The agreement created a formal protection for frontline staff who intervene on behalf of patients and families against improper conduct by security or administration. Explicit. Written. Enforceable protection. For the nurse, or the aide, or the technician, who looks at a wall of guards around a frightened family and says, "No, I will not. Come with me." Protection, so that the next Nia does not have to gamble her job to do the right thing. They named it in the internal documents after her. Not publicly. She did not want that. But it is there, in the policy. Because the truth of that whole night was that the system's cameras and the system's reviews and the system's policies had all failed. And the only thing that had actually worked in real time, the only safeguard that functioned when it counted, was one 31-year-old nurse's conscience. So they wrote her conscience into the policy. They made the bravest thing in the building into a rule. So the next person would not have to be quite so brave. Alone, Nia did not lose her job. She was, 6 months later, leading the very ombudsman office. The agreement created the nurse who had had the least power in the lobby, now sitting in the office with the authority to make sure no family ever stood in a wall like that again. The one who had said, "Trespass me too," now holding the door. For everyone who came after, it did not erase what happened on that marble floor. Nothing erases it. But it was a start. It was the system being made to remember what it was for. Adora and Becky Hart's mother recovered. It took weeks. But she came home, and on the day they discharged her, a nurse put a fresh paper band on her wrist to take it off again. The small ritual of leaving. And Adora watched it and thought about the other band, the 22-year-old one in her wallet. And something closed a circle in her chest. She kept the new band too. Of course she did. She released exactly one public statement about the whole affair. And, like the woman she was, she wrote it herself. Plainly. On paper. She said she had not gone looking for this. She said she recognized that her title had bought her something most people never get. Not safety in the moment. The moment had been just as ugly for her as for anyone. But consequences afterward. A hearing. A record. A reckoning. She said the reforms were a beginning and not an ending. And she said one more thing. The only line that made it into every report, that the measure of a hospital or a town or a country is not how it treats the people it knows are important. It is how it treats the person it has decided is no one, late at night, when no one important is watching. And that person can do nothing for you in return. Then she went back to work. Her first week back, her office took up a case, a different family, a different institution, the same shape, someone with no title, and no card with a seal, who had been treated as less than human by people who assumed they could get away with it. She put her name on it and went to work, because that is what justice does. It does not rest. It does not stop at the one case that happened to land on a powerful person. It shows up the next Monday and tries again. For the people who will never make the news, let me take you back to where we started. The marble lobby, the unplayed piano, the man with the swagger and the badge. That was not a badge. Leaning on a desk with a coffee he did not pay for. Deciding, before a single word was spoken, that a tired woman in a gray cardigan did not belong on his floor. Adora and Becky Hart had the credential, the seal, the office, the convoy that came when she called 18 years, a federal prosecutor, the chief of an entire district, sworn and confirmed and powerful. And none of it, not one piece of it, protected her on that floor that night. Every bit of it only made sure there were consequences after. That is the thing that stays with me. The system did not protect Adaora and Becky Hart in that lobby. Her title did not stop Voss. He never read it. What protected her was a fire safety panel installed by accident on a separate circuit. A stranger named Desmond, who held up his phone. A nurse named Nia, who risked her job. A deputy who came when she called. Remove any one of those. Any single one. And this story ends in silence. A daughter turned away. A complaint marked resolved. A woman driving home in the dark, telling no one, because who would believe her? And if it could nearly end in silence for her, for a United States attorney, then understand what that means. It means that somewhere tonight, in some quiet town, with its own banners on its own lampposts, the same thing is happening to someone who has no card with a seal, whose mother is upstairs too, whose hands are just as careful, who narrates their own movements the same way, who has learned the same lessons in the same hard school, someone whose fire safety panel is not recording, whose lobby has no Desmond in the chairs, whose Nia is too afraid that night to say, "Trespass me too." That person will go home, if they get to go home, and tell no one, and the binder will say, resolved. No action warrant. But here is the other thing that is true. Cedar Hollow changed. Not perfectly, not overnight, but it changed. The Ombudsman Office published its first report inside 6 months, and it included 2 more findings of improper conduct. 2 cases that the old binder would have swallowed whole. Exposed. Now, in daylight. The cameras cannot be turned off anymore. The exceptions are written at the top of the policy, where a frightened daughter can point to them, and a nurse who once stood shaking in a wall of security guards now runs the office that makes sure no one stands there alone. Change does not happen in one night. It happens in the morning after. And the morning after that, that marble lobby is still there. The piano, nobody plays. But by the front desk now, there is a sign, in plain language, that was not there a year ago. It lists the exceptions. Family of critically ill patients may stay, and under it, smaller, a line about how to reach the patient, ombudsman, day or night. No business hours. New form. That line exists because one woman in a gray cardigan refused to be made into nobody, and one nurse refused to let her be, and because the most powerful prosecutor in the district decided that the thing worth using her power on was not revenge, but making sure the next nobody got seen, she still carries the wristband, 22 years old, and now a second one beside it. 2 small scraps of paper that say the same thing. Across 2 decades, one person choosing to see you can change everything. Okay, so this whole story, I made it up. Adaora is not real. St. Brennan is not real. Cedar Hollow is not on any map. But I am going to be honest with you. My hands were tight the whole time I wrote it. That part is real, because the shape of it is real. It happens in lobbies, and at desks, and in waiting rooms, to people whose mothers are upstairs, every single day in this country. And most of the time, there is no fire safety panel on a separate circuit. No stranger in the chair with his phone up. No nurse brave enough that night. No convoy coming when they call, because they have no one to call. Most of the time, it just happens. and it gets written down as resolved, and the person goes home and tells no one, because they already know how it sounds. So here is the only question I actually want to leave you with. Forget the title, and the convoy, and the reveal. That is the fantasy. That is the part I made up, so it would feel good for a minute. Here is the real one. Who are you? When the person in front of you can do nothing for you. When there is no card with a seal. No one watching. Nothing in it for you either way. When they are just a tired stranger with a dying mother. The kind of person it is easy to decide is no one, because that is the only test that ever actually counts. Not how you treat the United States attorney, how you treat the woman you are sure is nobody. If this one got to you, leave a like. Share it with someone who needs to sit with that question. And if you are not subscribed yet, you know what to do. I will see you in the next one.